A few months ago, Dominic reviewed the MSI GE76 Raider with 11th gen Intel Core i9 processor and RTX 3080 graphics. Hang on, what's this? Stand aside, you old grouch, before I die of boredom. Leo the fanboy is going to give you the up-to-date gen on this revised version of the GE76 Raider, which has an Intel Core i9 12th gen. So that's an Alder Lake processor, combination of P cores and E cores, and also packs some DDR5 memory. Well, yes, quite. This might be a tricky review, this one. Externally, this GE76 Raider looks like the laptop Dominic reviewed. The changes are internal, so it's a 3 kilo laptop. The power supply, 280 watts, is another 900 grams, plus you need a mains cable on top of that, so you're past 4 kilos. 17.3 inches on the diagonal, 3 screen options, so 4K 120Hz, Quad HD 240Hz. This is the Full HD 360Hz version, so the display is the same as the one on the laptop that Dominic reviewed those months ago. Oh, come on, I want to hear about that 12th gen processor and the DDR5. How long is this gonna take? We'll get to the internal shortly, but first we're going to take a tour of the ports and connectors. On the right hand side we have two USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A connectors and a UHS Express SD card reader. On the left hand side, a 3.5mm combo audio jack, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C with DisplayPort, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A. On the rear we have a mini DisplayPort connector, a Type C Thunderbolt 4, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, HDMI 2.1 and the power connector. I've removed a handful of screws from the bottom panel, all the same size and length, that makes life easier. And before I remove the panel, worth pointing out, this notebook is an engineering sample. As it happens, it was sent to KitGuru by Intel UK rather than MSI. So we can be confident that Intel thinks the processor in this laptop is something special. Let's get the bottom panel off. Go away. And there we have it. Inside the chassis, now I've removed these covers from the SSDs, we have a pair of 2TB SSDs. You'll note this label came off with this self-adhesive cover, so you're seeing the same SSD times 2. It just looks different because you're missing a label. We have the DDR5 memory under this black monolith of, I guess it's a heatsink of some persuasion, but that appears to be stuck tight, and I don't fancy trying hard to remove that in case I break something. Wi-Fi 6E wireless from Killer, and then the usual cooling arrangement on the GPU and the CPU, plus an enormous battery, but this is familiar from previous GE76 Raiders. It looks incredible. We've got the high-end Core i9 12900HK, so that's a desktop CPU essentially. We've got an RTX 3080 Ti graphics chip, desktop part, loads of SSD, DDR5. This is a desktop PC, high-end gaming, and it's crammed into a laptop chassis. Brilliant! Well, no, not quite. Naturally, you expect mobile parts to be restricted in terms of power and therefore speed compared to their desktop counterparts. However, both the processor and the graphics differ significantly from the desktop parts. The Core i9 processor 12900HK is not the same as a 12900 or 12900K or 12900KF on the desktop. It has fewer performance cores. It is also restricted in terms of power and therefore performance, but restricting the number of cores means, to my mind, it's more like a Core i8. The numbering system is just confusing. In terms of the graphics, the RTX 3080 Ti performance is actually very similar to an RTX 3080 mobile part, laptop part, because power. It doesn't matter how many shaders you have or what other features you have. If you're limited on power, performance is going to take a hit. And it so happens that the laptop parts, these aren't even called Max-Q parts these days. NVIDIA calls these laptop parts. and they are very much different to the desktop parts. Different power, different number of CUDA cores, different memory controller. Yes, this is super duper high-end hardware in this laptop, but it is not desktop hardware. We'll use an external monitor so you can see the next part more clearly. As you'd expect, the behavior of the laptop is controlled by MSI Center. It has these 5 modes. Smart Auto basically picks whichever of these 4 modes seems most appropriate. So in essence, it has 4 modes: Extreme Performance, Balanced, Silent, Super Battery. There's a 5th mode that was shown off in MSI's recent video about its laptop.
Another new feature is the Ambient Silent AI, which defines what silent means in a relative way. The background noise you feel in a coffee shop and in an office is different. In a coffee shop, the background noise could be above 45 decibels, whereas office noise could be just as much as 30 decibels. Ambient Silent AI will actively detect the surrounding noise level and raise fan speed accordingly in order to provide higher performance for your usage.
But we don't have that, so let's look at what we do have. We're interested in PL1 and PL2 in particular, super battery mode, a mere 15 watts for PL1 and PL2, which means that performance is going to be slow. Click up to silent mode. PL1 steps up to 30 watts and PL2 also 30 watts. Balance mode. And now we've got 110 watts and 135 watts. In the extreme performance mode, power is unchanged but cooling ramps up. The extreme performance mode has a little cog and can be configured. We can change a couple of the settings for the GPU, and also we can play with the fan speed in the cooling system. So we're on auto at the moment. If we choose, we can go to advanced and we can set fan curves for both CPU and GPU. Cooler boost. Bearing in mind at the moment the system is doing absolutely nothing. So this is demonstrating that this is a mad fan speed to get the system icy chill back to auto. That's better. Smart Auto also has a cog, and here we can change a couple of settings, which kind of makes no sense because the idea of auto after all is the system does it for you. At this stage in the game we're really looking at a custom mode. I did some test runs in Cinebench R23 to see what those settings meant in practice. From the top, Smart Auto Mode, PL1 55 watts, PL2 135 watts, i.e. boosting. And in Cinebench R23 we saw 61 watts sustained package power, 89 degrees Celsius package temperature. Fans were running at 3,270 RPM. Why didn't I say 3,300 RPM? Anyway, that fast, which is noisy but not terrible. The P cores 2.9 GHz, the E cores 2.3 GHz. The balanced mode, this to my mind was going to be very similar. However, it turns out PL1 110 watts, PL2 135 watts, 57 watts sustained, so higher PL1, slightly lower sustained. Great scheme of things, not a lot in it, but the P cores ran at 3 GHz, the E cores 2.3. Now these figures are dynamic, they shift around. In balance mode, the Cinebench score came out at 14,728 and the Smart Auto mode 13,935. That's 800 odd points different. So balance mode appears to be doing a better job than Smart Auto. Funnily enough, one of my cons for this review is going to be I don't find Smart Auto mode to be all that smart, and this demonstrates that. The other two modes that I checked out, at the top end of the scale, the Extreme Performance mode, PL1 110 watts, PL2 135 watts. We saw the best Cinebench R23 score on this laptop using that setting, 72 watts sustained package power, 3.3 GHz for the P cores, 2.6 GHz on the E cores, package 95 Celsius, fans 3,600 RPM, That was noisy. Impressive results, but pushing the silicon to the limit. And then at the other end of the scale, in silent mode, so PL1 30 watts, PL2 30 watts, the Cinebench R23 scores 8,500, sustained 30 watts power, as you'd expect. P-cores 1.9 gigahertz. E-cores 1.6 gigahertz. Package runs at 60 Celsius. So the silent mode, I think we can park that one. The extreme mode is absolutely just going for benchmark results. Smart Auto, I didn't much like it. Balance mode, which happens to be MSI's recommended mode, that's the good one. Now it's time for some RGB. We've turned the lights down low so we can have a look at the RGB, both in the keyboard and also the light bar at the front. You might think the MSI Center software would be used to control the RGB, but not so much. We open the SteelSeries GG software. And here we can see under Engine, we have a selection of options. MSI Aurora controls the light bar at the front. MSI Per Key RGB keyboard. And that software that does exactly what it says controls the lighting on the keyboard. The Rival 50 MSI Edition mouse happens to be this mouse I have plugged into the laptop. It doesn't have any RGB, so it doesn't do anything particularly clever, but it is identified by the software correctly. Quite why MSI has decided that Mystic Light wouldn't do to control their RGB in this particular laptop isn't entirely clear. How did the GE76 Raider perform in my various benchmarks? I suppose I should really say GE76 2022 because they've used the same chassis for 10th, 11th and 12th gens, but this is the one we're talking about. I'm comparing this laptop to a variety of desktop processors so we can see exactly where this processor sits in the pantheon. I'm also looking at Luke's recent review of the Asus ROG Zephyrus G14, and that is also a 2022 version because there was a Zephyrus last year. That's the latest AMD hardware. Really good review. Go look at it if you haven't already. And Luke has just published a review of the Asus ROG Flow Z13. The processor in that laptop very similar to this, except it is a Core i9-12900H rather than HK. But in terms of spec, it's so close, it's just unbelievable. And you will also see a few results in there for the MSI Raider GE76 2021 that Dominic reviewed, which is the 11th gen processor. 3D Mark TimeSpy CPU score. The three results for balanced, Smart Auto and Extreme Performance clustered together. Weirdly, Extreme Performance the lowest of the three. Clearly silent mode is way down the bottom of the chart. It did well, and it beat out those other two laptops. If you look where this laptop sits among those desktop processors, the answer is pretty good. You can see the 12th gen technology in the CPU in this laptop is taking the fight to desktop processors in an unexpected fashion. Bapco Crossmark. We've only been using this benchmark for a very short time. It's really one for 12th gen processors, but for fun we do have the Core i9-10900KF down the bottom of the chart, beaten by this laptop in silent mode. So that's telling you something, in my opinion, about the way a Crossmark has been constructed to take advantage of the hybrid CPU technology. And then as we go up the chart, we see the Extreme Performance, Smart Auto and Balance modes from this laptop. Once again, Extreme Performance not doing as well as we would expect. Balance mode is the way to go. Blender 3.0 Classroom. Blender only updated to version 3 quite recently. We haven't done a lot of testing with it. This laptop, very impressive, and it beat the ROG Zephyrus G14 by a decent margin. So the flat out performance from this processor beating AMD's newest. And then we see trailing a distance behind the ROG Flow Z13. So basically the same processor in a much smaller chassis. However, if you throttle this processor in silent mode, it does terribly. Cinebench R23 multi-core. So the 12th gen processors up the top of the chart, followed by the Core i9s. Then we get this laptop. Then we get the other laptops. Then we get the last gen of this laptop. and then we get this laptop in silent mode. In a sense, there are no surprises in this chart, but it does illustrate what the processors are doing in each case. Just look at the difference between this laptop in silent mode and the desktop Core i9-12900K. That's triple the score. Cinebench R23 single core. Naturally, you'd expect the scores to close up here, but we still get quite a variance. Power plays its part, no doubt about it. The G76 2022 doing a very fine job. Far Cry 6 tested at 1080p because this laptop has a 1080p panel. The desktop parts were tested with a desktop RTX 3080 graphics card, and you can see up the top of the chart we've got the 12th gen desktop parts followed by the 11th gen Core i9. Then you have this laptop going very nicely. Once again, extreme performance not doing so great. The old Core i9-10900KF desktop part comes next, then this laptop in silent mode doing a perfectly reasonable job, and then Luke's ROG Zephyrus G14 with the latest AMD hardware, trailing a distance behind. Far Cry New Dawn. We've got the desktop parts up top, obviously helped by that beefy graphics card, and then we have the laptop. 4 different modes, balanced mode once again doing best. Even the silent mode, however, does competently well. Those are perfectly decent frame rates for gaming. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy at 1080p. I've got the Core i9-12900K up top, along with that RTX 3080, and then 4 different runs with this laptop. Extreme performance this time comes through, and how? That's a big leap on from the other settings. Balance mode, good. Smart Auto, slightly less good, but pretty blooming impressive. And at the bottom of the chart we have silent mode. Clearly the average 115 FPS is huge, however minimum 48 FPS, perhaps a tad on the low side, so let's avoid silent mode for gaming. Watch Dogs Legion, we have various desktop processors up top, followed by this laptop. Balance mode once again doing best and beating out extreme performance by the tiniest of margins. Luke's Zephyrus G14 2022 version down the bottom of the chart, and by a significant margin. Memory bandwidth. There are some curious results here. So up the top we have the desktop parts with desktop DDR5 memory, just as you'd expect. Then we have the tiddly little Asus ROG Flow Z13 LP DDR5 memory. Look at the figures there. Then we get the 4 runs from this laptop, followed by last year's MSI Raider GE76, but that's DDR4. Then down the bottom, the ROG Zephyrus G14. Luke comments on this in his review. You get some very curious figures. The memory write, very slow. On average, not so good. And then we have the battery test. I tested with both PC Mark 8 and PC Mark 10. Dominic tested last year's Raider GE76 using PC Mark 8, so we can do a straight comparison. Bearing in mind that laptop and this laptop have the same battery installed, and you can see the 2022 version has significantly better life than the 2021. Updating the hardware inside it has done a power of good. Stepping up to PC Mark 10, we've got runs from this laptop in balance mode and super battery mode. Then we have the Asus ROG Flow Z13 that Luke tested, which has just eclipsed this laptop, no two ways about it. But then the ROG Zephyrus G14 with AMD hardware makes Intel look absolutely stupid. Quite clearly, this processor can perform, but it takes a lot of power to do it. And let's not forget the other parts of the laptop that make it a laptop. The screen is very good. As Dominic said in his review, the Full HD 360Hz option is the least useful of the 3 screens on offer. I completely agree. I like the screen a great deal. Would much rather a higher resolution screen, and less than 360Hz refresh would be fine by me. 240Hz, no problem. 120Hz, absolutely fine as well. Screen, good. Keyboard, also very nice. Dominic would rather see a mechanical keyboard. I'm okay with this keyboard. It works well, it feels nice. The RGB in the keyboard looks good. You can start to ask yourself, is a laptop that's costing north of £4,000, $4,400 we understand, does it need per key RGB? Is this not a serious laptop? On the other hand, if it's a gaming laptop for the kids, then RGB is of course essential. Similarly, the light bar on the front. I mean, it's perfectly pleasant. You can turn it off. I like actually the fact it's part of the laptop chassis. When you pull the bottom cover off, you haven't got to mess around with the lights. That's a good thing, but clearly it is a pure frippery. Touchpad, also good. The laptop as a laptop works well. So let's move on to the pros and the cons. And I think we're going to have to call back the fanboy to handle the pros. Yes, indeed. The processor in this laptop is absolutely fantastic. Also, the screen looks amazing. And the I/O, including Thunderbolt, what's not to like there? Hard to disagree with any of that. On the cons side of things, the RTX 3080 Ti graphics, they work very well, but in practice they're no step up from the RTX 3080 laptop graphics that Dominic saw. I mentioned during this review that the Smart Auto mode in MSI software did not appear to be very smart. I'm sticking to that. The software appears to work reasonably well, but I think there are some wrinkles that need working out. I've already mentioned that the Full HD panel seems to me to be a limitation on this laptop, and a Quad HD would be better. I'm not necessarily calling for the 4K option, but more pixels than Full HD are, in my opinion, essential. And finally, this laptop is hugely expensive. £4,000, maybe even more than that, is just a fortune. You can of course pay less for this laptop by down speccing, and I recommend that you consider that. Overall, it's perfectly decent. Nonetheless, you can get one heck of a sight more for your money if you shop elsewhere.